Carl Lowe House was built in 1889 and is located at the top of Brook Street at Woodland Boulevard. It is a fine remaining example of Queen Anne and late Victorian houses with irregular design and rare ornamentation. This late 19th century structure had a succession of law practices there through the years. It is a small, well-preserved Carpenter Gothic building, an excellent example of its type. It's now a law museum, open only on special occasions. The Smithy Hotel is east of the courthouse and was built in 1891. It was once a center of mercantile trade on the ground floor, with the area's main hotel above. This late 19th century example of small-town commercial architecture remains relatively unaltered outside. The J.T. Ferguson store is across the street from the Smithy Hotel. This building's front is cast iron and pressed metal, produced in St. Louis in 1887. The classical and Victorian details are still bold and impressive today. The manufacturer sold more than 5,000 building fronts during a 23-year period, but this is one of the few remaining. The Johnson Hubbard House was built in 1855 by Stephen Johnson and purchased in 1885 by Julius C. Hubbard. It remains much in its original state. The upstairs bedroom ceilings were painted with designs made with a smoking pine torch. The Presbyterian Church was established in 1837 and built in 1849 to 1850. The church is 2 blocks east of the courthouse on the south side of Main Street. It served the oldest Presbyterian congregation in 21 western North Carolina counties. Its tetra-style Doric portico is an excellent example of the popular design of the time. The Brown Coles House dates from the 1830s and is the oldest known building remaining in Wilkesboro. Hamilton Brown built the central structure, and Congressman W. H. Coles expanded it. The slave kitchen and curing house are among the few outbuildings still remaining in the area. Dr. James Calloway, M.D., came to Wilkesboro around 1835. The old Calloway home was purchased from General William Lenore. It stood on the corner diagonally opposite the courthouse. This house was headquarters for Major Hambright when Stoneman's brigade came by Wilkesboro. Dr. Calloway was responsible for bringing Siamese twins Ing and Chang Bunker to Wilkes. The history of St. Paul's began with a service of baptism on September 13, 1836, conducted by the Right Reverend Levi Silman Ives, that took place at the home of James and Susan Dodge. Samuel Finley Patterson and the Gwynns gave the land for the church, and 4 other families spearheaded the drive to erect the building. James and Mary Ann Gwynn, Dr. James Calloway, and 2 sisters, Miss Fanny Williams and Mrs. Mary Peden, a widow who later married the second rector, the Reverend Richard Wainwright Barber. The Reverend William R. Grimes was the first clergyman. The brick Gothic church, resembling a miniature cathedral, sits atop a hill overlooking the small village of Wilkesboro on the south and the Yadkin Valley to the north. All white members who had slaves, Dr. Calloway, James Gwynn, James Dodge, the Hickersons, the Williams, and others, saw that their slaves received religious instruction and were then baptized. In 1850, there were 44 black and 55 white parishioners. James B. Gordon, who was killed in the Civil War, is buried there. Miss Mary T. Barber, also known as Mamie, was the daughter of Reverend Richard Wainwright Barber, who began a boys' boarding school, which later turned into a girls' school. Miss Barber had been an honor graduate at the school and a former teacher at St. Mary's in Raleigh. She eventually became the head mistress of the school in Wilkesboro in 1879 and continued until her death in 1924.
This bowl, the story is that this bowl was at my grandmother's, great-grandmother's, Mrs. Peden Barber, and the bishop came to baptize some children, and all they had was just this. So he said to Mrs. Barber, "Oh, let me borrow that and take it up so I can put water in for the Christmas." And so it's been here ever since. This came from her home down just south of Wilkesboro, Cedar Lawn. The house is still standing. It's a beautiful house.
In 2002, Mrs. Kathy McKenzie, North Carolina Cultural Arts Director, received a grant that partially paid Benjamin F. Long IV to paint 2 frescoes depicting the story of St. Paul at the church. In 2005, the St. Paul's frescoes became part of the Benjamin F. Long IV Frescoes Trail Consortium, which is composed of representatives from Wilkes, Iredell, Burke, Avery, Buncombe, Ashe, and Mecklenburg counties. Wilkesboro business and industry grew from very modest beginnings: general merchandising, farm and wood products, pottery, and tobacco. The factories making garments, gloves, wood products, among other things, began to close after NAFTA, since jobs were sent overseas. Northwestern Bank, then the state's fourth largest bank, built its headquarters here before it was bought out by a larger bank. Wilkesboro at one time could boast of its pottery, tobacco, and poultry processing plant known as Holly Farms Poultry, and later Tyson Foods.
I started with Holly Farms in '53 and bought a hay thinners. In '55 I bought the other hay, approximately. There were still a few outside stockholders at that time, and I become president either '53 or '54. And helped the office of president until the year '75. And I moved up to chairman of the board. Mr. Garvin is now president. I guess you know Mr. Garvin.
Yes, I do. Yes.
My father was born to, I can't recall the names, in 1900 and grew up in Wilkes County. At that time he went, I think till he was 14 years old, through part of elementary school. And quit and went to work, or went to the coal fields. Stayed out there for about a year, and he didn't particularly like that, so he come back home and went to R.J. Reynolds and went to work for about 6 months. He didn't like that, so he come back home and went to farming. He then later decided that he wasn't going to ever get anywhere working for himself. So at the age of 22, working for somebody else, and he needed to go to work for himself. And at the age of 22, he went back to school to get him a little more education. And this is when he met my mother.
People tell me that you and Mr. Lovett were the beginners of the chicken business in Wilkes County.
That's right. He just had this dream of, he had peddling in his heart, in his mind.
Yeah.
Because he used to haul apples with a wagon and team into the little cotton mill towns and sell them. And he got this idea of getting live produce, chickens and eggs and hams. And he bought a Model T truck in February before we were married in May. And he was about not quite a mile out here, living with some folks, with my grandparents, and he just got his cups and went back in the mountain here, where back then there was a little country store at every bend in the roads, you know. And he borrowed a mule and rode a mule into the mountains and contracted this stuff.
In the middle 20s, my dad began the business of buying and selling produce that was surplus to farms and were brought into general stores throughout western North Carolina. He always told me that he found that his most popular product in doing that, in buying from individual large farmers and small farmers and general stores, that his most popular product was chickens and eggs. So in 1928 he built this chicken house, and my memory starts in the middle 30s. It was built 6 years before I was born. Was that the original chicken house was made up of the 4 glass windows that you see there. And there was a small brooder, I'll call it a brooder stove, but it was really a brick and mortar masonry construction inside that original portion with a flue going straight up through the ceiling. At some later date, he built the portion that you can see with the 3 windows setting lower than the first 4 windows. And I think that increased its capacity by about 1/3. The original chicken house, if I remember, housed about 200 baby chicks.
This live chicken business got to be a much larger part of his business, and by that time he had his oldest son Fred was pretty involved in the business, as was Rex. By that time he was 12, 13 years old, and so Daddy had a lot of help. And he also had the help of a couple of my mother's brothers, Guy Bumgarner and Clayton Bumgarner, and several people around the community there that came and got into the chicken business or the trucking business or whatever business they pursued in later life as a result of working for my daddy in this produce business and in this chicken business.
When I first went in, we didn't have anything. The town didn't have anything, and to mount anything, nothing going much. We didn't have any water, and we didn't have any streets except mud. And soon after I got in, after you get a few good dressings down over mud holes and no water and this, that, and the other, why I took an interest in trying to do something in that field more than anything else, and just kind of grew on me to try to get something going. And we didn't do much good. We didn't have nothing to do with, and we ran out of water every day, and from our water system, and that drew a lot of attention from a lot of us. And this is one thing and another, and you get interested in what was happening and what you thought you might do, and we kept, and that's how come me to stay with it as long as I did. I kept thinking maybe we could get something going and doing, and we did. But we had one plant here in Wilkesboro when I grew up as a boy. It was called the pottery. They made flower pots, and that was all place to get a work that there was in this town was that pottery, and they worked 2 or 3 people. And Holly Farms had come in later years, and then they hired a lot of people, but they were in trouble along when I went on the town board. They were in trouble without any water. They wouldn't have enough water to do all day. They'd run out every day. And when it come to Wilkesboro and come as hiring people, or did hire people, things changed tremendously.
What did you do to improve the water system, and how did you pay for it? And I guess Tyson was the driving force behind the...
Yeah, they were. One thing, like I said, they ran out of water every day. The whole town did, and they were. Fred Levitt was tremendously helpful. If he caused these troubles, which he caused town troubles, but they were good causes. I mean, if it hadn't been for them, I don't know what the town would ever done. Got a grant from the government for $250,000. And we had a bond issued in for $250,000 matching funds and built a water plant. In my thinking of whatever I have accomplished or did accomplish or help accomplish in Wilkesboro, the water plant was the best thing that I ever had anything to do with doing for the town.